It wasn't until maybe month 3 of me being in Geneva that I wondered why I was waking up every day so happy, feeling completely in my element, really fulfilled, and just kind of like, walking on air. And I suddenly remembered the dream.
We can't always choose what happens to us necessarily, but we also get to choose how we respond to it.
Well, if it never comes, will I be in this place of limbo, waiting? Or what will I do with the in-between time, the waiting time? And I chose to be happy. I chose to be joyful. If we're not intentional about the choices that we make, other people will decide for you, and you might not like it.
What can you say is one thing today that you know for sure?
One thing I know for sure is that...
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Trust in the Process with myself, Deborah Chosen. I am so excited about the guest that we have here today. This woman, for me, needs no introduction. She's actually my real life auntie, but I'm borrowing her to you in this episode. Her wisdom is second to none. I'm sure you'll find as we navigate through her story that her journey is one that is rich. And for me, she's someone who, when I look at, I see a life well lived. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Caroline Harper-Jantuah. With 3 decades of experience working in corporate and not-for-profit sectors across Europe, North America, Africa, and Asia, Caroline is an award-winning facilitator and executive coach. Her expertise includes organization and leadership development with a specialism in inclusion, diversity, and culture change. Holding an impressive wealth of experience and a first-class clientele to match, past and present clients include the likes of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and Ernst & Young, to name a few. Graciously navigating the most corporate work environments, Caroline models the power of meeting people where they are to foster connection. A lover of travel, she frequently embraces adventures abroad and even created a home for herself in Geneva, Switzerland, where she worked and lived for 5 years. At 70, she has a more bustling social life than many, including myself, and as I've said before, is evidence of a life well lived. This is Trust in the Process. So, Auntie Caroline to me, but if it's okay if you're referring to as Caroline for the people, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. I feel very privileged and honoured that you asked me to. I was like, yes, she's asked me.
I felt the same way that you said yes. I was like, oh my gosh, she wants to be on it. This is so cool, honestly. Thank you so much. As I shared before, I have had the pleasure of being able to have proximity to you and, just see the amazing things that you do in life. And I think most importantly, the way that you show up, you have a natural aura about you that is very royal, very regal, very intentional. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation because I love for people to see that, a life well lived is one that is a life that's lived with intentionality. And so just before we jump into kind of the thick of things, we're going to switch things up a little bit and just do a quick fire round.
Okay.
So just a few fun questions to get to know, Caroline on a fun level. So the first question, solo travel or traveling with friends?
Solo all the way.
You wasted no time. What would your reasons be?
Oh, solo, I can do what I want, when I want, how I want.
Yes.
And I'm not kind of trying to negotiate and compromise and build everybody else's wishes in.
No.
When I'm with other people, I give way to other people. So when I go solo, it's for me.
Yeah, freedom. I love that. Red or white wine?
Oh, red.
Yeah.
Yes.
I personally need the answer.
Full-bodied, dry, oaky, smoky.
Ooh,
yes.
Oaky and smoky, I love that. And so you're relaxing. What do you prefer, being curled up with a good book or curled up with a good movie?
Oh, it has to be a book. Because movies don't leave too much to your imagination.
Yeah.
Reading a book, you can create your own fantasy around what you're reading, and then the words mean a lot to me. So the way in which the writer has crafted the story really kind of, draws me in. Yeah. And I like the feel of books. So preferring physical book to a digital book.
Yeah. Kindles, it's just not quite
the same. But I make do.
Yeah. The smell of pages sometimes and fresh is just
I buy books on the basis of what the font looks like.
Oh, really?
And the feel of the paper.
Oh, you're really specific about that.
And I think, that feels like it'll be a good book to read.
I say don't judge a book by its cover, but maybe judge it by its pages. Okay, so live in the city or live in the countryside?
Oh, I'm torn there. On the edges of the city.
Okay, I see how you did that. we'll let you off.
Yeah, on the edges,
Yeah.
so that I can have the best of both. I love to be out walking in nature. I'm very curious about land generally, and I like some of the hustle and bustle of the city and what it has to offer. I suppose at this age, wanting a bit more space, a bit more green, a bit more nature, but not to be isolated.
Yeah. Somewhere in between the two. And finally, are you a morning or a night person?
I'm a morning person. It doesn't mean I leap out of bed and want to have conversations with people.
But you're up.
I do my best work in the morning. My best thinking is in the morning. Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. So I want to start by kind of taking things all the way back to where you grew up. Of course, today, here we are in London. You've traveled all over the world, but the beginning of your journey really started in Nigeria. So I'd love to know, what was it like growing up in Nigeria for you, and maybe what were some of your fondest memories?
Oh, okay. I was actually born here in London. And as a family, we went back to Nigeria, to Lagos, when I was 5 years old. So it was just before independence. And so I lived in Lagos, Nigeria, through the 60s, the 70s, and part of the early 80s. And, I was thinking as I was driving in about that, and the 70s, going to university in the 70s was a fabulous time because things were fairly safe. I used to go to parties, drive to parties on my own at about 11 at night, drive home at 3, 4 in the morning, without a care in the world, without a second thought. So I particularly enjoyed that sense of safety and security. My fondest memories of Lagos were going to the beach. I'm a beach baby. And my happiest place is by the beach, by the water. And we had a family tradition that every Sunday we would go to the beach. And so I have a lot of very fond memories of that. I like the notion and the sense of extended family. It's very important to me. And so I do have a very large family. And at one point we decided that it wasn't good enough that the only time we got to meet was at funerals. And we had to then do reintroductions all over again because we just didn't spend enough time together. And so as a family, decided that we would have regular meetups at different houses. And that way we got to know each other really, really well as cousins, got to know our children as well. And so I have very fond memories of that. So, yeah.
I love the intentionality that you all recognize we need to make this a more frequent thing. I think sometimes, especially in today's day and age, and actually I think living in London as well at times, you can find yourself constantly catching up with people. It's constantly like, oh, I hope to see you soon. And then 6 months pass by, and before you know it, you haven't seen each other. So I love that you're intentional in that.
Yeah, we had a lot of freedom growing up as a child in Lagos. We grew up in Ikoyi to begin with, and school holidays, we would grab a bicycle and say bye, and parents would say be back on time for tea, and off we went. Can you imagine trying to do that in today's world? And so that was great, that sense of independence and going with your gang, and just going to Ikoyi Park and playing, looking for I can't remember what they were called, like guppies in the mangrove swamps and stuff like that. None of that seems to exist anymore.
Yeah. Going back to growing up in Nigeria, let's think about child Caroline, right? And what her dreams, what her aspirations were. What did you want to be when you were younger?
Oh, I had very clear dreams of becoming a doctor, and not just any old doctor, but a pediatrician.
Okay.
And that I would train at Johns Hopkins University Hospital. Yeah, I was as clear as that. Yeah, and that was the only aspiration I had, profession-wise. But it didn't turn out that way.
As we'll soon find out. Although it turned out amazingly, but not quite that way.
Not quite that way. Yes.
Do you see anything in what you do today in the doctoring industry or in that profession? Can you see any?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I've connected up the dots, So I have a very scientific mind. And also from a sort of medical practice, it's understanding how things work, how to fix things. It's about helping people who are in need. And that's what I do or have done for the last 30 odd years when I reinvented myself. Because through coaching, through facilitation, through working on organizational culture, what I'm trying to do is to understand, how does it work now? Is it meeting purpose? What do we need to change to be a better version of what we already have? And then how to work with people for them to actually act differently in order to create what they say they want. And so it still feels a little bit like doctoring, little bit like being a scientist in a laboratory, experimenting. And so there are lots of similarities there.
Yeah, I love that. That's why I love asking that question, because I find that so often, even though we may stray away from the specific thing that we thought we wanted to do, the kind of core of it remains the same. And you can't kind of run away from purpose. It's always going to follow you. And so whether it's being a doctor or whether it's as an executive coach, that helping people, that using science, like you said, kind of being strategic, and it's going to show up. So I love that you shared that. I think when we think about your story, it's very easy to kind of be enamored by the part where you worked with UN.
Yes.
You're like, wow, this is the highlight of this woman's life. But this is not where everything began for you, of course. This is not the first place that you began in your career. Actually, I know that you started off in entrepreneurship for some time. I believe you had a business with a close friend of yours that you ran for quite some time. And so I think for people, they often think they can only maybe do entrepreneurship or do the corporate thing. But you're someone that shows that you've been able to do both. And so I'd love if you could tell me a little bit about what that business was about, and really, I guess, what inspired you to take that direction at that point in your life.
Okay. So, I said I reinvented myself. Yes. And I actually started off as a biochemist working in a brewery. I was one of the first female brewers in Nigeria at the time. And then I became a little bit more interested in managing people. So that took me into an MBA. And then at some point, I left Nigeria and I moved to England. And I started working in organizational development, learning and development, that sort of thing, in a pharmaceutical company. And come 2001, I had an opportunity to take redundancy. And my son was about 4 years old and was just about to go to school. And my thought was, yes, I have a great job. Yes, it's got a lot of international travel, a lot of responsibility, one of the largest, best pharmaceuticals companies in the world. But what I really wanted to do was to be there for my son. And so I took that opportunity to take redundancy to then set up my own consultancy. And after the first year or so, went into partnership with a very close friend of mine. And so for 15, 16 years, we clawed our way up, 2 Black women, trying to establish a systemic, evidence-based organization that worked on inclusion and diversity. And I think we were one of the first in the UK to recognize that diversity on its own, getting a diverse mix of people around the table, was insufficient if the culture of the organization did not support it, if it was not truly inclusive. And so a lot of the work that we did was around saying, yes, we'll work with your Black cohort of employees, but only if we can also work with their managers, who tended to be white men, you know? And we would say there's no point us energizing, firing up, equipping your Black talent if the manager cannot cope with that, because what you'll end up with is either people will stay but their heart won't be in it, or they'll go off to pastures new. And we did some research around that. We did some research into why it is that ethnic minority women in the UK who were being successful, we were interested in success. What was it that made the difference for them? And we published this data, and we, on the back of that, we were able to grow our business and to get some really, really good clients who wanted to do really good work, who were genuinely committed. And we were, I suppose, bold enough in those days to turn down work if we felt that the client wasn't committed to genuine change, which was quite scary because, you know, our bread and butter kind of thing. But we were that, we had that much belief, I think, in what we were doing and wanting to make a lasting difference, that we were prepared to say no and to trust that the opportunities would then come. And they did come. So for which we were very grateful.
Yeah, you have a very impressive list of clients that you worked with. Just the two of you, like I said, two Black women, you know, just kind of forging their own path. And I think it's so interesting to think that you were amongst some of the first that recognized that diversity alone isn't enough. You know, in that sense, you were definitely you know, those that kind of paved the way, I think, for others to come behind and sort of think about diversity and inclusion in a different way. So that's so powerful. But what is really impressive is 15, 16 years, I think, you spent running this consultancy. In today's day and age, like they say that I think most businesses kind of fail in the first 5 years or something like that, right? 15, 16 years is not small at all, right? So I guess what would you say kept you going? And then, of course, working with a friend as well. I think sometimes maybe we shy away from the idea of mixing with business with pleasure, you could say. What kind of kept you going in those 16 years?
It was hard. I won't lie. It was very, very hard. And we went through some really difficult, challenging times. But I think that... I mean, we are two very different people in terms of personality and style and approach. And we found a way to actually bring the best out of each other. Yes, we used to knock heads and be at loggerheads over various things, but we were able to, I guess, harness the what each of us brought to the table. And our clients absolutely loved it. You know, we always co-delivered. And it was like a dance between the two of us. And I think that we really challenged ourselves to continue to grow. So we never kind of rested on our success. There was always more that we felt we could do, needed to do, wanted to do. And that included personal self-growth and development. So we were able to have some really deep, authentic conversations with each other to clean up when we'd made a mess, when we'd caused offense, you know, unintentionally, when we hadn't quite delivered of our best. And that kept it going. You know, it really did, because I think we both recognized that together we were stronger, and that we were actually creating something quite special in the way in which we approached the work.
That's beautiful. It's making me think, like, in some ways I can imagine that working with a friend is a little bit like being married. It's a bit like marriage in the sense that, you know, in marriage I say that the other person's like a mirror. I feel like you best see yourself because of that close relationship you have with that person. And I can imagine something like working together on a business with your friend and a close friend, and that you see sides of yourself that maybe you didn't know existed, maybe sides of yourself that you're proud of, other sides not so much. So it's so interesting how it can be, you know, a personal growth kind of project as well as, of course, a business project. You referred, when we were speaking before this, you referred to working at the UN as a forgotten dream. So something that you had penned down as a vision, as a dream, and then kind of, I guess, forgotten about it. And then fast forward, and this was in 2001, and you said the dream was was planted in your mind. And then fast forward, it really wasn't until many, many years later that that opportunity came about in 2016. Can you talk to me about that gap in between and how you landed the role eventually? And what did you take from that in terms of the dream being deferred, so to speak?
So it's absolutely fascinating. Even I marvel still at how it unfolded. So when I was preparing to leave Glaxo Wellcome to set up on my own, I was encouraged by my boss to figure out, so what did I want to do? And prior to taking the redundancy, to start to prepare for that. And so I knew I wanted to do something around coaching. And coaching in the UK was very new at that time. It was on the ascendant in the US, and some of it was coming over to the UK. And I had the opportunity to, rather than do a coaching program, to go and do a piece of personal development around neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And NLP is very much about the structure and the form around language, how we say things, how we use the space in a room, how we use our body language can shape and influence how others respond to you, for good or for bad, right? And one of the programs, one of the modules in that program was around visioning the future. And we did all kinds of exercises around visioning the future. And we were asked to write it down. And in my vision, I saw myself on a global platform working in a refugee camp, supporting children in that camp. And I wrote it down, thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I'll do. But that's not what I did. Instead, I stayed home in the UK and I set up the consultancy with my partner, Carol, and worked on it for 16 years. And yes, the global aspiration was there. But it was there around working with corporates, because corporates paid the money, right?
Of course,
And I was a bit snobby and snootish about working with not-for-profits. So I thought, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, where I was going. And towards 2015, 2016, I was feeling quite burnt out. I didn't realize it at the time. It's with hindsight, when I think back to how I was, I realized I was a bit burnt out then. And I discussed it with my partner and said, you know something, I actually feel like I would like to do something different and maybe slow down my involvement in the business and, allocate some of that time to something else, but I don't know what I want to do. In the end, we decided that wouldn't work. And so I stepped away from the business 100%. So while I was still trying to figure out what am I going to do, somebody sent me the advert for the role with UNHCR, the refugee agency in Switzerland, in Geneva. And it was a 6-month contract. And I knew very little about working for the UN. I didn't know that that's how they reel you in. They test you for 6 months. If they like you, then they extend your contract. And so at that point, my son was about to go to university. And I thought, well, if he's off at university, I'm quite free to do whatever. Discussed it with him and with the other boys in the house, young men in the house, because a lot of my nephews lived and passed through my house, and said, well, what do you think? And they said, wow, why don't you just go for it, see what happens? So I did, and I got the role. And, I ended up working with them for 5 whole years. And it wasn't until maybe month 3 of me being in Geneva that I wondered why I was waking up every day so happy feeling completely in my element, really fulfilled, and just kind of like, walking on air. And I suddenly remembered the dream. And I was like, wow, why did it take so long? And you asked the question whether, the interval between the dream and its reality. I think personally that all of the work I did, running the business, developing myself, growing my experience, all of that I was able to then take to UNHCR and apply it. And none of it was wasted.
No.
And unfortunately, they didn't know what they were getting. They thought they were getting a diversity and inclusion advisor who would work on policy. And I said, you can do policy, you're the UN. You do policy every day, day in, day out. I said, what you don't do is behavior change. That's what I'm here to do.
He said, I'm just going to edit the role just a little bit here. They had no idea what
They
was
had
coming
no
from
idea, yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful hearing your journey and that the importance of that gap. Because I think sometimes when we have a dream and then it doesn't necessarily come to fruition on the timing that we had in mind, we can feel like, oh, I wasted my time. I wish it came to me sooner. But actually paying attention to what you were able to learn from that season of your 15 years of a season, right? 16, sorry. What you're able to learn, what you were able to develop within yourself is what actually prepared you, I think, for this opportunity and meant that, you even had the confidence to be like, this is what I'm here to do. And this is how I'm going to do it, And so it's to not take for granted those years that might feel like the quiet years and the waiting years because, God wastes nothing. He uses everything. I'd love as well, if you can speak to the idea of changing your mind. Because I think it's really powerful. You're running a business, 15, 16 years, it's successful, you're thriving, you have the freedom of entrepreneurship and everything. But then you mentioned that you realized that it wasn't working for you. And I think it's so interesting that you weren't sure what it was that you wanted, but you just knew it wasn't this. I think sometimes we stay in situations longer than we're supposed to be because we've married our identity to that job or to that person, right? Or to that opportunity, wherever it might be. What would you say to those maybe who are afraid to change their mind and to change course?
I think decision making is tough because we want to feel like we're making the right decision. And so when we do make a decision, I think it's natural human nature to find it difficult to say, well, maybe it's not the decision I want now, And so I like to think that decisions are made for now, and there could be different decisions tomorrow because context changes. And I think we also make decisions in the moment based on our best knowledge, our best information. There's hardly anybody who just wants to mess up with the decision that they make. So they're doing the best they can. And it could be that, even if we are trying to take a well thought out decision, that there's something we haven't quite factored in. Or things have moved on, or it was okay then, it worked then, it doesn't work now. And we need to feel confident and bold enough to actually, having thought it through, to say, time to change, time to move track. And to, I think, trust that if you have continued to work on self, trust that if you have continued to grow, that it will be okay. It will work out. It might not work out the way you exactly think it will, but it will work out. Because otherwise we will stay stuck in a place that no longer serves us. It may have served us well at one time, but it doesn't now. Because, everything around us is not kind of like static and attached to us. It moves as well. It's a very fluid, dynamic world that we live in. And so why should we expect that it remains exactly the same, 2 years on, 5 years on, 10 years on?
you change, and as you change the things that you require from life, even from yourself, from others, it changes as well.
It really does. And people around you who you're very attached to may not change. They may stay stuck. And I think that's part of what causes the angst around, well, this isn't working for me anymore. But this person I'm attached to, in whatever way that attachment is, what happens if I try to move, in a different direction?
That's so good. So you move at this point, you make that transition, you accept that this isn't working for me and it's time to move on to something else. And you accept, of course, the UN offer and you start working there in 2016. So when I pitched to the UN, I mean, this is someone that's never been to Switzerland, never been to Geneva, never been to UN anything. But when I pitched to the UN, people are walking around in suits, like we're speaking corporate language. It's very uppity and they're very important conversations that are happening at big round tables. That's my vision. You don't have to tell me what the real thing is. But for the sake of this question, you now arrive into that place, into that room as a Black woman, and you're navigating a corporate business, you're navigating a corporate organization. Were there any challenges navigating the corporate workspace for yourself? And if so, how did you overcome those?
Yes and no. The UN is quite unique in that because it's the United Nations, there is a requirement to recruit diversely. Gotcha. And so the UN is probably much more diverse than, say, corporate UK or corporate America, where there's no kind of mandatory kind of expectation. And so I did walk into a very diverse setting, but that doesn't mean that the practices were inclusive. Okay. So when you do the analyses, for example, to see where are people, what's the demographic of where people are sitting in the organization and who is having and holding what kind of role, you can then start to see that some of the issues that we encounter in other sectors are there too. I suppose because of the inclusion and diversity role, typically you would expect a woman, typically you would expect an ethnic minority. So I wasn't unusual in that regard. But I think I was unusual in that I had somehow learned how to speak truth to power in a way that they could listen and hear. And so, to the surprise, I think, of people around me, I was able to have access to quite senior leaders in the refugee agency. And they began to actually promote me as a facilitator when they needed to have some sensitive cross-agency discussions that could do with some facilitation. And I think that that made me very visible very quickly across the UN and within the refugee agency. And I think that people were very curious about that, So what is it about her that makes that difference? And they were curious about my ethnicity. And they wanted to, know. So what's your mixed heritage? What's your background? And of course, all those assumptions about, well, you probably went to private school in the UK and all that. I said, no.
Not at all.
Not at all. And so that as well, so I was a little bit of an enigma for them, I guess. And then not being UN born and bred, a lot of people spend all of their career in the UN, 20, 25, 30 years. Okay. And I show up and I say, actually, I've never worked for the UN before. And I'd like to know why you do the things the way you do them and what's the rationale. And don't you think it's a different way to do it? So I had a lot of fun while I was there. So it was more, I guess, about in some ways, here is a different version, maybe, of the stereotype some of them held about a Black woman, you know. And so that was a bit of a challenge in the nicest possible sense for them.
Yeah.
And also, I think, you know, like, for example, around the George Floyd murder, and certainly in my agency, a lot of the white senior leaders not knowing how to talk about it, and were so concerned about causing offense, and asking me for advice around wordings and how they engage, and can you hold space for us to have this kind of conversation. So in some ways, I would say that my experience as a Black woman is not the typical experience. Which is quite interesting. And I know it's a long way of responding to your question, but when I first came to England, I did not understand the UK Black woman or the UK Black man's experience. And I was not very empathetic, I have to say, because I came with my Niger kind of thing. We're all Black. I have equal right to be in this space as you do, and I'm not going to wait for you to give it to me, I'm going to take it, kind of thing. And I could not understand why and what that was about, but all the work that I did allowed me to then have that insight into it, and to be able to not necessarily step into the shoes, but walk alongside people for whom that is a very real experience. And I've always championed the vulnerable, the underdog, the what have you. So of course I put on my warrior.
Yeah, let's go to war.
You know, let's go. And to use the favor and the access that I seem to be gifted, to then use that to create the space at the table.
That's beautiful. What do you think your superpower has been, or is?
It is that power to communicate and influence and create safe spaces for people to speak about their fears and their concerns. And so, I end up being privy to quite a lot of confidences around that. I think that's a superpower. And then to find ways to empower the individuals to then act on what they want to do, what they need to do.
I've seen all of those things in you, definitely. Even in like a family dynamic, I'm like, she's just a peacekeeper. Like, she's also a spokesperson for people that maybe feel voiceless in moments. Those things just come so natural to you. And it's so interesting seeing how it shows up in the work that you do as well. But I want to talk for a little bit about passion, okay? Because I think the way that you speak about diversity, inclusion, and the work that you do, there's so much passion there. And I think it's something that you've always cared about. But I think sometimes as people, we feel like we have to kind of separate the two. So there's passion and then there's kind of like a paycheck, right? And it's like, if I chase my passion, I might not be paid, or I might not get paid well. What would you say in terms of the importance of doing work that you love? Have you found that having a true passion for what you do has been an advantage for you? How important do you think that is?
I think it's really, really important to discover what your passion is, and that it's quite easy to go through life and not work at your passion and keep that, separation. It's not always easy, actually, to discover what your passion is, partly because we can be fed all kinds of stories by those who have influence over us as to what we should do, the typical story about you have to be a doctor, engineer, etc., etc.
Accountant, lawyer.
Yes, yeah. Or, you're very smart, you know numbers, so why don't you go and be an accountant? That kind of thing, which has some logic to it, but you might not be passionate about it. I think that when you're passionate about something, you go the extra mile, and you, isn't it fantastic to wake up each morning with a smile on your face, knowing that you are going to get stuck into something you absolutely have a love for, than, oh, I got to get out there and do another 9 to 5 and pick up my paycheck at the end. Life is too short to spend it just on that treadmill. And so I feel it also keeps you young, actually.
Yes,
I think it does.
Look at you.
It does. Yeah. I think it does. And I think that we can actually make do with less if we are doing what we love. You know, I think we can tolerate and put up with some of the down times if what we're doing is something we're passionate about. But if we're just going through the motions, then all of that negative stuff, I think, gets amplified. So, yeah.
That's really powerful. Speaking of passions, I know one of your passions is traveling.
Oh, yes.
One thing about Auntie Caroline, you don't know where she's going to be by the time she responds to your WhatsApp message. So are we in Rome? Are we in France? Where are we?
Yes.
Catch me if you can, Caroline. That's what I'm going to start calling you. But, you know, when we speak about the things that make us come alive and your passions, of course, one of them for you is travel. What does travel do for you?
I have an insatiable curiosity about people and their lives, you know, so I love nothing more than going somewhere I haven't been before, encountering a new culture and spending time with people, experiencing and chatting with them about their traditions and what have you. So that's one of the reasons why I love to travel. It's to get to meet and learn about new cultures, new places. I think as well, I love travel because it expands my mind, you know, and it gives me perspective. There's nothing better in my view than to be able to step away from an issue, a challenge, and look at it, you know, from another perspective, another point of view. Go up a mountain, imagine your problem is down in the valley and have a good look at it. And so I do some of my best reflections when I'm away from what is familiar. So I don't have to go very far. It doesn't always have to be on a plane somewhere.
Sometimes you'll get a train, but 9 times out of 10,
But it is about stepping back, stepping off. And I think that when I travel, I don't have my routine. I don't have the tried and tested. And so I'm living at the edge of my comfort zone, which keeps on expanding and expanding more. And that I find enthralling. You know, so yes.
Oh, just you talking about travel makes me want to book a flight. If ever you want to take another career, travel agent, like I see something there, you just sell it. And I think when we think about travel, so many of us are waiting for the perfect time or our friends to be willing to go with us, or maybe even we save certain trips for like, oh, when I'm married or when I have a partner, right? But you strike me as someone who doesn't procrastinate with your joy. You don't defer or delay your joy. In fact,
I used to.
That's so interesting. What changed? Was it a decision that you made?
It was. It was a decision. And it's a decision that I've made progressively, I think. You know, there was a time when I thought that life just happened to you and you just had to make the most of whatever showed up. I didn't know, I didn't have that belief that you had some influence over what happened to you. And I had a light bulb moment when I realized that actually there's a whole lot more that can happen if you take a bit more control, a bit more intentionality around it. I used to defer happiness, defer joy until the time when, you know? But there were a few things that happened where what I hoped for didn't come soon enough. And I had to really question myself, well, if it never comes, will I be in this place of limbo, waiting? Or what will I do with the in-between time, the waiting time? And I chose to be happy. I chose to be joyful. And that has only become even more important as I've grown older, to choose to live a choice and to choose joy, you know, so, and not to put it off, because you don't know tomorrow.
Yeah, and also you are the author of so much of your life. I think sometimes we feel so helpless. Like you said, we can take the approach that, well, as the chips fall, that's how it is, and I just have to make the most with what I have. But actually, it's so empowering to think, no, I can play a significant role. I get to sit in the driver's seat of my life as well, and I get to choose the direction in which I can go. We can't always choose what happens to us necessarily, but we also get to choose how we respond to it as well. So even that is like reclaiming your happiness, reclaiming your joy. It reminds me of something that you said at your birthday. So for those that aren't aware, we had the pleasure of flying out, of course, because we were not going to celebrate it just here. We flew out to Morocco, Marrakesh, to celebrate your 70th, which was a beautiful, beautiful time. And I remember in your thank you speech, the words have stayed with me, and you mentioned it. You said, we live at choice. As we're closing, what do you want those listening to know about the gift of choosing?
I think there's nothing worse than feeling you are out of control, you know, that you have no choice. And regaining that sense of control to be able to choose, even if it is just to choose your response to a situation. You know, the situation's happened, it might be dire, you know, but you have that opportunity to choose. And how will I respond to this dire situation is a way of taking control over what happens to you, whether that's at an emotional level or a physical level or whatever. I think that even choosing to do nothing, we need to recognize as a choice, and to make it consciously and intentionally. Because if we're not intentional about the choices that we make, other people will decide for you, and you might not like it, you know, and you may kind of like look back and say, if only I had. And I certainly don't want to live a life of regrets. And so even though it can be challenging at times, I always try to get clear, what are my options and what am I choosing? And gear up, find the courage if it's needed to then do that.
I love that you said that even when we're not choosing, even when we're not doing a thing, that's also making a choice. You know, even choosing to not do something is still making a choice, it's still choosing. And so being intentional about the decisions and the choices that we're making is so powerful. Aunty Caroline, at 70, like I said, you are living such a rich life, such a beautiful life. You inspire me to live life more, you know? Like I look and I think, Aunty Caroline is not at home. There was a time when me and Demi, we were just at home. We had no social plans. And you were out and about, you posting pictures of yourself with your friends in the group chat. And I said, Aunty Caroline has a better social life than us. You know, we need to live life more. You remind me that life is to be lived. So with the journey that you've been on, that you have, you know, gone through to this point, what can you say is one thing today that you know for sure?
One thing I know for sure is that there's always more. You know, that there is always more to experience. There's always more to be, to become. There's always more to give, more to do. It doesn't end. So it's not a destination as such. You know, I don't feel that we should be trying to get to a particular place, but we should be trying to journey well, you know, and that every step is an opportunity to be more, do more, not necessarily have more, because that can become baggage that you just carry around with you. But yeah, that there's always more. There's always more about you, as in we will never reach our full potential. There is always more there.
A life well lived, a journey that has been beautiful, and honestly, we look forward to seeing them all in your life. I'm excited to see them all, and I thank you so much for just sharing your energy, your time, your space with us today. So, Aunty Caroline, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.